Have you ever had the feeling that no matter how hard you try, you always return to the same empty place? As if something, or someone, is calling you back to a time that should have long since passed? You move house, change your hairstyle, delete photos, even block names. But inside there's a presence, an echo, an ancient whisper that insists on finding you in the silences. Rumi said, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." But what if you're running from the light, afraid to revisit what still pulses in the dark? Because no matter how much time has passed, there's something back there that you still hear. And no, it's not just longing. It's your soul's call to revisit a fragment that was trapped, a version of you that was never rescued. How many times have you sworn to yourself, "I'm over it," but in the middle of the night, in the instant of a scent, a song, a name, it all comes back. And it doesn't come back because you're weak. It comes back because your soul craves answers. Because there's a spiritual part of the past that still needs to be truly examined. You've left the past behind, yes, but the past still calls to you. And what hurts isn't him. It's you pretending he no longer has power, pretending you've forgotten. But every time you try to move on, something pulls you. And that something isn't physical. It's emotional. It's energetic. It's spiritual. Because the past isn't just what happened. It's what's left vibrating within you after everything is over. It's what's still alive within your silence. Maybe what you feel isn't longing, but the absence of a part of you that never returned. Maybe you're not trapped by what happened, but by the identity you built within that story. The woman who believed she was loved. The child who just wanted to be seen. The soul who just longed to be recognized as enough. And that's why the past calls to you. Because there's something unsaid, something unaccepted, something unhealed. Rumi revealed, "Do not look outside for what can only be cured inside." But what no one tells you is that the past isn't out there. It still lives within you. It manifests itself in your patterns, in the loves you choose, in the pain you repeat, in the emptiness that insists on visiting you when everything seems peaceful. And I ask you now, how many times have you tried to bury something your soul only wanted to transform? How many times have you confused healing with escape, overcoming with repression, growing with hardening? Because there's a gentle truth that few have the courage to face. You no longer suffer for him. You suffer because you still don't know who you are without him. You've left the past, but it still calls to you, not to imprison you, but to set you free, to free your soul from an invisible prison, to free your heart from the story you told so many times until you believed it was the only one possible. And if you're here, maybe it's because you're ready to hear what was never said, to see what you've always avoided, to finally reconnect with who you were and allow it to be integrated, embraced, and freed. But first, we need to go back, not to stay, but to heal. We need to look at what still hurts, not with judgment, but with compassion, with presence, with an open soul, because that's when everything starts to change. And that's why this video isn't just another conversation about the past. It's a mirror, a dive, a call to go within. You're not here by chance. Your soul brought you to this moment because it knows something needs to be heard, acknowledged, finally understood. And before we continue, I invite you to do something symbolic and deeply necessary. Write in the comments now, "I hear the call of my soul." This isn't just a sentence. It's a decision, a permission, a portal of consciousness. When you write, you manifest. When you declare, you begin to remember who you truly are. And if this video has touched some silent part of you, don't miss it. Leave a like. This shows the universe that this kind of content needs to reach other souls who are also trying to heal in silence. Subscribe to the channel. This is more than a video. It's a journey. Each episode is a key, a layer, a reunion. We didn't come here just to understand the past. We came to transcend it. And now, stay with me, because what comes next is the most profound revelation. Why you really still feel, and what to do with this calling that won't leave you alone. You've left the past behind, but the past still calls to you, and you hear it, not always with words. Sometimes it's a smell, a memory, a strange sensation in the middle of the day that disconnects you from the present and throws you back to a time that should have already died within you. But it didn't, because the past doesn't disappear when we pretend it no longer hurts. It falls silent for a while, but becomes a constant shadow, stalking your steps, appearing in your silences, screaming inside you every time you try to move forward. Rumi said, "You have to keep breaking your heart until it opens. And maybe what still hurts you isn't the memory, but the fact that your heart still hears it. It still echoes the sound of something you didn't want to feel fully, of something you tried to heal in a hurry, something you tried to forget, like someone locking a door from the inside and throwing away the key. But the soul doesn't forget what wasn't accepted. The soul doesn't silence what was ignored. And that's why you feel this call. Because the past still pulsates in some part of you that has never been rescued. You've convinced yourself you've already moved on. You've created new routines, met new people, built a new story. But inside, sometimes it feels like you're still in the same place, the same absence, the same emptiness, the same invisible hole you try to fill with distractions, with promises, with silences that only serve to postpone the pain. And maybe no one notices. Maybe you're that person everyone thinks is strong, who's overcome everything. But you know what it feels like at night, when the noise of the world finally quiets down. You know what it feels like when you see someone who reminds you of him, of her, of that, of what was, or of what never was, but could have been. And that's where the cycle begins. The cycle Rumi understood like no one else. This eternal return to what still bleeds silently, not because you want it, but because your soul needs it, because the wound is still a prayer, because the pain you feel is, in fact, an attempt at healing that was interrupted, a story poorly told within you, a chapter that was hastily closed but that continues to cry out for a true conclusion. It's profound to understand that the past doesn't call you out of malice. It calls you because part of your soul is still trapped there, trapped in a memory, in a face, in a feeling of love that turned into longing, in an abandonment that turned into walls, in a rejection that you've turned into a pattern. You no longer love that person, but you still cling to who you were while you were with them, to the idea of who you were, or who you believed you could be if you'd been loved the right way. And that's why it's so hard to let go, because the attachment isn't to the other person. It's to the version of yourself you associated with them, to the feelings you had, to the hope you built, to the illusion you nurtured. Because deep down, the longing isn't for him, for her, for the story. The longing is for you. It's for a part of you that was left behind at that time. Rumi wrote, "Do not seek outside what can only be healed within." And this is where most people get lost, because they're still trying to resolve the past with external actions, cutting people off, blocking contact, trying to look good to others. But there's no point in locking the door if the scream still comes from within. There's no point in running away if what haunts you is in your soul. And maybe you're tired of being strong all the time, of carrying invisible pain, of pretending you don't feel anything anymore, of saying you've overcome it when you know there are still nights when everything comes back like an old movie, and you watch, alone, in silence, trying not to feel, trying to maintain composure. But the soul doesn't want composure, it wants truth. It wants freedom. It wants space to hurt until it hurts no more. Maybe you're not broken. Maybe you're being reborn. But to be reborn, you have to die. Die to the characters you created to protect yourself. Die to the fears that keep you in the same place. Die to the need to understand everything with your mind, when what needs to be understood is in the language of the soul. Because the soul speaks in symbols, in sensations, in silences that carry more meaning than 1,000 words. And maybe that's why the past still calls to you. Because there's an undeciphered symbolism in that pain, a secret that needs to be revealed, a truth you still avoid looking at, because looking at it means losing control. It means allowing the pain to come full force, so it can finally go away. But what if that's exactly what you need right now? Not to run, but to feel. Not to run, but to stop, to breathe, to lean your soul against that memory and ask, what still hurts here? What haven't I accepted yet? What do I still need to release? Because it's in that moment of quiet courage that everything begins to dissolve. Not because you've understood everything, but because you've finally allowed yourself to feel everything. And it's in this sacred space between pain and acceptance that healing happens. Not as a sudden miracle, but as a sigh, a relief, a reconnection with parts of yourself you never even knew existed. Because when you stop fighting what you feel, you start listening. and what you hear transforms. So, if you've made it this far, it's because your soul is ready to hear this call, ready to cross this invisible portal that separates what was from what still is, ready to look at the past with eyes of presence and say, I am here. I no longer deny you. And it is in that moment that time stops, that the pain changes its name, that the wound begins to heal from within, because it has finally been seen. If this makes sense to you, if any part of this video spoke directly to your soul, write here in the comments, I no longer deny what still lives within me. Because this sentence isn't just a comment, it's a turning point. It's the beginning of a new chapter where you no longer have to pretend it doesn't hurt, because now you know, it's through feeling that you free yourself, ready to continue, because the truth that comes now will touch what is still hidden behind your silences. Maybe you've physically freed yourself. Maybe you've done everything that felt right. You've cut off contact, discarded memories, changed places, changed your look, filled your days with other voices, other presences, other distractions. But your soul is still there, still trapped in that moment, frozen in time, in that last conversation that never ended, in that silent goodbye that hung in the air. You wonder why it still hurts, even when it's over. Why even with time passing, even with life moving on, there's still something that insists on pulling you back to where you swore you'd never return. The answer isn't outside. It's in what remains inside you. It's in the part of you that kept quiet that day, that swallowed its tears, that convinced itself it needed to move on without looking back. But every time you silence what you feel, it finds other ways to surface. And it appears in your silences, in your insomnia, in the dreams that visit you without permission. It appears in the fear of giving yourself over again, in the excessive care with everything, in the need to control so as not to break down again. It even appears in the way you love today, with your body present, but your heart hidden behind armor no one sees. And this is more common than you might think. There are pains we hide even from ourselves, pains you've held so tightly that you've convinced yourself they no longer exist, but they remain, shaping your steps, dictating your limits, sabotaging your attempts to start over, because you don't need to be in a place to still be connected to it. Your physical presence doesn't define your emotional freedom. The body may have left, but the soul still awaits closure that never came, and it's not easy to admit, because we live in a culture that values those who get over it quickly, those who show strength, those who don't show weakness, as if feeling were a mistake, as if crying were a sign of failure. But ignored pain turns into a labyrinth, and before you know it, you're spinning in circles within your own story, repeating patterns, attracting the same emptiness in different bodies, reliving abandonment under different names, all because back then, you couldn't or didn't know how to feel everything that needed to be felt. Rumi said, you have to keep breaking your heart until it opens. And perhaps that's exactly what you're experiencing now. A slow, painful, but necessary process of opening, because the heart that refuses to break closes, and the closed heart may seem strong, but it's a heart where life no longer enters. The pain you hid didn't protect you. It silenced you. It alienated you from yourself. It made you create versions of yourself that are functional to the world, but disconnected from your innermost truth. And therein lies the conflict. You're living a life that seems right on the outside, but you feel something missing on the inside. An absence you can't name. A weariness that can't be explained by accumulated tasks. A sadness that appears at times when everything should be fine. This is no coincidence. This is your soul crying out for attention, asking to be seen, to be welcomed, to be heard finally without judgment, without rushing, without the pressure to be perfect all the time. The spirituality that heals isn't the one that distances you from pain. It's the one that invites you to experience it consciously. It's the one that doesn't give you ready-made answers, but rather shows you questions you've avoided asking. And one of those questions is, what in me is still there? What in me was trapped at the moment everything fell apart? Because until that part is reintegrated, you'll continue to feel something missing. And no matter how much love you receive, how many goals you achieve, how many people admire you, there will always be a blind spot, a void, a silence that screams. And it's at this point that many give up, that many prefer to continue living half-heartedly, because the truth is frightening. The truth demands surrender. It demands surrender. It demands the courage to go back there, not to suffer again, but to embrace what you abandoned. Yourself. The woman who tried to be too strong. The child who wasn't protected. The soul who only wanted to be heard and wasn't. This pain you've hidden isn't your enemy. It's your key. Your gateway to a version of you that's whole, alive, awake. But to get there, you need to go through what you've avoided for so long. And you don't have to do it alone. When you allow yourself to feel, you create space for the sacred. You allow light to enter through the crack in the wound. Rumi called this the alchemy of the soul, the ability to transform pain into wisdom, absence into presence, the past into compassion. And this only happens when you stop fighting what you feel, when you understand that your pain has something to tell you, that what still hurts you is what still cries for attention. Have you ever wondered why you keep repeating the same feelings even in different stories? Why sometimes everything seems new, but the emotional flavor is the same? This is the pain you've hidden manifesting itself again, with different masks. Because the soul doesn't accept substitutions, it wants truth, it wants integration, it wants freedom. And freedom, in this case, isn't forgetting. It's remembering with ease. It's revisiting without bleeding. It's looking at the past with the peace of someone who is no longer there, but has managed to reclaim what remains. Your soul knows the way, but it needs you to stop running, to breathe, to ask yourself honestly, what still hurts me, even though I say it's over? This is the question that begins the healing, that disarms the ego, that opens space for the spiritual to touch what the emotional couldn't. And this space is sacred. It's silent. It's profound. It's where you encounter your most vulnerable, and therefore most powerful truth. Rumi also said, don't settle for stories of how things happen to others. Awaken your own legend. And your legend begins when you stop living according to the expectation of what you should be feeling, and start honoring what you truly feel. When you choose to listen to your soul, even if it means facing what hurts, because it only hurts where there is still life. It only hurts where there is still something to be healed. And if it hurts, it's because your soul is alive, crying out for you. If you've come this far, if you read every line with a heavy heart, if you felt that some part of you was touched, write here in the comments, I give voice to the pain I hid. She writes with courage, as an act of presence, as a call to the heart, as someone who decides today to take a step closer to herself, because this sentence isn't just a comment, it's a seal, a silent commitment to her own soul. The wound isn't the end. It's a cycle that repeats itself until you see yourself whole. It may seem strange to think of pain as cyclical, as something that returns not to punish you but to reveal you. But that's exactly what it does. It doesn't haunt you, it guides you. The wound returns when you insist on living with only half your soul awake, when you try to build a new path over rubble that was never removed, when you look forward but still carry the emotional debris of what was undigested back then. You think you're loving again, but you're just recreating the same unconscious bonds with different people. You think you're starting over, but you're just repackaging the same story. You love, run away, come back. You love, run away, come back. As if something inside still silently asks to be seen. As if your soul says, it's not over yet. You still need to look at me. And this is how the silent cycle manifests itself. It doesn't shout. It doesn't invade your life with a bang. It whispers. It hides in subtle patterns, in reactions you already know, in the anxiety that appears out of nowhere, in the fear that paralyzes you when it's time to trust, in the feeling that no matter how hard you try, something is always missing, something always escapes, something always repeats itself. You realize you're back in the same place, but it's too late. You're there again, stuck in the same emotional script, playing the same role in a different costume. Rumi said, the wound is the place where the light enters you, but light only enters where there is space, where there is presence, where there is acceptance. And most of us have learned to deny pain, not to understand it, to run from it, not to move through it, to treat suffering as an enemy when in fact it is a compass. It points to where you are still fragmented, to what still needs to be embraced within yourself, because you are not being punished for feeling. You are being called to awaken. That's why you keep repeating yourself, because you didn't heal, because you didn't integrate, because you didn't look deeply into what was behind the end. And this has nothing to do with guilt. It has to do with awareness, No one taught you to do things differently. No one told you that pain can't be resolved quickly, that overcoming isn't about forgetting, that moving on isn't synonymous with denying what's left. So, you learned to survive emotionally as best you could, and you survived well. But now perhaps your soul is asking for more, not survival, but presence, wholeness, real freedom. The cycle only breaks when you see yourself completely, when you no longer choose to ignore parts of yourself for fear of what you'll find, when you no longer project your healing onto someone else's arms, when you decide to turn inward, to look into the eyes of pain, to ask, what do you still want to show me? Because every pain has a message, every emotional repetition has a purpose, and to ignore this is to condemn your soul to a fragmented life. Maybe you've never had the space for this inner listening. Maybe you spent years pretending to be okay, choking back tears, adapting to versions of yourself that pleased others, but stifled who you truly were. Maybe you learned to always love others more than yourself, to keep quiet when you wanted to scream, to surrender when you barely knew what you needed. And now you feel lost within yourself, that you no longer know what love is, what fear is, what impulse is, and what intuition is. It's normal. This happens when we spend our lives trying to survive pain without ever understanding what it was trying to tell us. Deep spirituality is not an escape from problems. It's a return to what has been forgotten. It's the courage to sit beside your pain and listen to it as one would an old friend. Pain doesn't want to destroy you. It wants to wake you up. It only returns because you haven't yet returned to yourself. And as long as you keep trying to make everything right on the outside without fixing what's broken on the inside, the cycle will continue. Different people, the same emptiness, different stories, the same feeling of abandonment, different phases of life, the same hidden emotional wound. And maybe you're listening to this now with a heavy heart. Maybe you're remembering all the times you tried to do things differently, but ended up returning to the same place of pain, to the same patterns of emotional dependence, to the same relationships where you give everything and receive crumbs, to the same choices that distance you from yourself. And it's in this moment that you have a chance, the chance to stop, to breathe, to understand that repeating yourself isn't failing. It's being invited once again to truly see yourself. You deserve to break this cycle. You deserve to love without losing yourself, to trust without being annulled, to be alone without feeling incomplete. You deserve to see yourself whole, without needing someone's reflection to remind you of who you are. And this is only possible when you honor the pain, instead of fearing it, when you embrace what you feel, instead of hiding it, when you listen to what still hurts instead of running away again. Rumi also said, "Don't walk away so quickly. You're still shaping yourself into something new." And this is a truth we need to remember every day. Healing isn't a straight line. The soul has its own time, its own rhythm, and all it wants is to be heard without rushing. Because when you listen, you change. When you listen, you return to yourself. And when you return, the cycle is broken. But until that happens, the cycle continues. And there's no way to silence what the soul needs to express. You can distract yourself, occupy yourself, hide. But one day, it all returns. Because pain only goes away when it fulfills its mission. And it only fulfills its mission when you look at it truthfully. So now I invite you to ask yourself with all honesty, what inside me hasn't been addressed yet? What wound still keeps me trapped in this cycle? What do I repeat even when I don't want to? Even when I say I don't want to anymore? This is the gateway to the end of repetition, to the beginning of true emotional liberation. And if this question resonated with you, if you felt it resonated, write it in the comments below. I choose to see my truth in its entirety. Leave this phrase registered as a symbol that your soul is no longer willing to live half-heartedly. We still have a long way to go, because the next step will show you what happens when you stop fighting the pain and start listening to what it really wants to teach you. The past calls to you, not because it wants you back, but because there are parts of you that never left. And this may sound mysterious at first, but the truth is that what hurts isn't just what happened. What truly hurts is what remains. That version of you still frozen in that moment, in that pain, in that expectation that was never fulfilled. The child who waited to be heard and was ignored. The woman who loved with everything and was left halfway. The soul that screamed in silence and was never answered. These parts of you continue to wait, not for the other person to return, but for you to return for them. And that's why sometimes you feel this inexplicable calling, something that pulls you inward without asking permission, a longing that has no name, a sadness that arrives even when everything seems fine, a restlessness that arises in the middle of an ordinary day, as if the body remembers something the mind has already tried to forget. Because the unconscious doesn't forget. It files things away. And one day when you're ready, it will open the locked drawers, not to hurt you, but to free you. Rumi said, "What you seek is seeking you." Maybe what calls you isn't the other, nor the story, nor that place. Maybe what calls you is your own forgotten soul, the part of you that was silenced to survive, that was denied to fit in, that was pushed aside to avoid more pain, but now it's returning. It's trying to reach you, and that's why the past feels so present, because it carries not only memories, it carries fragments of your essence that need to be reintegrated. It's important to understand that the call of the unconscious is not a punishment. It's an invitation, a profound call to reconnect, to look within with more courage than judgment, to recognize that there's more to you than the pain you've experienced. But before accessing this more whole part, you must traverse what remains incomplete, because the soul doesn't ignore its broken parts. It wants to reunite them all. It wants to heal where there are still cuts. It wants to illuminate where there is still shadow. And that's when most people get confused, because they think this feeling of returning to the past means they're regressing, that they're weak, that they haven't overcome anything. But that's not the case. It's not regression. It's integration. The past only calls when you're ready to reclaim what's left. And every time you feel pulled back by old memories, by emotions that seemed overcome, by pain that returns, maybe it's not a relapse. Maybe it's an opportunity to reconnect with parts of yourself that have remained hidden until now. You can feel this when you feel misunderstood, even among people who love you, when you feel lonely, even in crowded environments, when you feel like no one truly sees what's going on inside you. This isn't an external problem. It's an internal reflection of a part of your soul that's still stuck in a memory where you weren't acknowledged. And until you return there with compassion, you'll continue searching outside for what can only be healed within. And this healing doesn't happen all at once. It reveals itself gradually, as if each emotional layer reveals a piece of your inner puzzle. You'll understand why you react the way you do, why you're so afraid to open up, why you still expect validation from places that never gave you love. You'll realize that your choices aren't random. They come from old memories that remain active in your unconscious. And that, once you recognize this, you can begin to change from the inside out. The call of the unconscious is subtle. It appears in dreams, in repetitions, in emotional triggers, in that feeling you can't explain, but know it's there. A sense of incompleteness, of something unfinished, of a story that hasn't yet ended. And this story doesn't need to be resolved with another. It needs to be resolved with yourself, with the part of you that lived through it, that felt it, that waited for an answer that never came. And now, it needs your presence, not the presence of someone who's gone. Have you noticed how your body responds to this? How certain pains appear in the same places? How your chest tightens when you remember? How your breath becomes shallow when a memory returns? The soul speaks through the body, and when you ignore this call, the body feels it. Because everything that isn't resolved emotionally is stored energetically. Therefore, healing isn't just thinking differently, it's feeling differently. It's welcoming what returns without resistance, without blaming yourself for still feeling, without trying to appear too strong for yourself. And if today, in this moment, you feel like there's something that still hurts, even without knowing why, maybe this is your calling. Maybe it's not about the past itself, but about the part of you that's still there, waiting for you to go get it, waiting for you to look it in the eye and say, "I see you now. I won't leave you alone anymore." Rumi also said, "Don't be content with stories of how things happen to others. Awaken your own legend." And awakening your own legend requires courage. Courage to break out of the cycle of repetition, to break with the old scripts you've learned to follow. Courage to enter the silence where the soul speaks, where pain reveals itself as a teacher, where the past is no longer a prison, but a bridge to your center, to your essence, to the part of you that has not yet been touched by time, by criticism, by the harshness of the world. This calling you feel is real. It won't disappear just because you want it to. It only quiets down when it's heard deeply, when it's answered truthfully. When you stop running from yourself and start listening to what your soul whispers between life's gaps, and if you have the courage to follow that sound, to walk into that pain, you'll realize that what seemed like an abyss was actually the portal to your own freedom. You're not regressing when you feel this. You're being guided inward. You're being taken back to the place where healing begins. And the soul only makes this move when you're ready. Ready to reclaim the part of yourself that was left behind. Ready to become whole. And it doesn't matter how much time has passed. The soul is in no hurry. It has purpose. If all this made sense to you, if you feel that there really is a forgotten part of you calling you back home, write here in the comments. I'll come back for myself. He writes as if he embraces this calling, as if he recognizes that it's time to stop living half-heartedly, because this sentence is more than a comment. It's a choice, a step, a reunion with his forgotten soul, and what comes next? We'll touch on that very point, because maybe you don't yet know what to do with all this feeling, but you're about to discover what happens when you stop ignoring it and start responding to the call with presence. You don't miss the person. You miss who you were when you were with them. And perhaps that sentence pierced you like a gentle blade, cutting through layers you didn't even know were still there. Because there's a deep, silent, and often unconscious confusion between love and attachment. You believe you're missing the other person, that you still suffer for them, that you haven't gotten over the end of that story. But in truth, what hurts isn't the person's absence. It's the absence of who you believed you were when you were with them. The spiritual root of attachment isn't the story itself. It's the identity you constructed within it. That version of yourself that felt complete, validated, desired, seen. That feeling of belonging, of being alive in a setting that, even when it hurt, gave some meaning to your existence. And when it all ends, what's broken isn't just the bond with the other. It's also the mirror in which you saw yourself. It's the character you played. It's the narrative that sustained your self-esteem. And that's why absence doesn't come just as silence. It comes as disorientation. Suddenly you no longer know who you are. You no longer know how to occupy this space that was once filled with promises, dialogues, rituals, fantasies. You feel as if you've lost your footing. But what you lost wasn't him or her. It was a part of you that was anchored in that reality. And however imperfect, dysfunctional, or even painful that reality may have been, it was familiar. It was a structure, a way of existing. And when that crumbles, what you feel is the internal collapse of the identity that was built from the other. True spirituality begins when you look at this emptiness with sincerity. When you realize that attachment isn't your fault. It's a language of the soul still trying to understand where, when, and why you disconnected from yourself. You didn't cling just out of need. You clinged because you saw there a reflection of something you needed inside. Maybe recognition, maybe acceptance, maybe the feeling of finally being safe. And that's human. It's sacred. There's nothing wrong with desiring love, but the mistake is building your own identity on a structure that isn't yours, in forgetting who you are when you're alone. How many times have you felt like you lost your footing when someone walked away? That your peace depended on the other person's presence? That your worth was directly tied to how the other person treated you? That's not love. That's emotional attachment built on an ancient absence, the absence of yourself. Because when you're connected to your essence, you can love deeply, but never lose yourself in love. You can grieve the end, but not be completely broken. You can miss someone, but not nullify yourself to fill that void. Rumi said, "You have to keep breaking your heart until it opens." And perhaps that's the hardest part, accepting that what seems like pain from the loss of the other is actually an invitation to reconnect with yourself, to rediscover that part of yourself you projected onto them, to reclaim the woman you were, not to return to her but to consciously integrate her, because that version of you existed because of the bond. But now it's time to exist because of yourself, and this isn't done with ready-made formulas. It's done with presence, with surrender, with vulnerability, with silence. Because to access the spiritual root of attachment, you need to stop fighting what you feel. You need to dive into the discomfort. You need to allow the pain to reveal to you what you've tried to control with rationality. Because attachment isn't rational. It's energetic. It's emotional. It's spiritual. It builds in the most subtle layers of the soul, where old traumas still echo, where fears disguise themselves as love, where absence masquerades as need. You can spend years thinking you still love someone when in reality, what you feel is the absence of your own presence. What hurts is the distance from yourself, the lack of a solid inner foundation, the absence of a ground where your soul can rest in peace. Because as long as you need someone to remind you of who you are, you will always be vulnerable to abandonment. And this is a difficult but liberating truth. No one has the power to give you what you haven't yet found within. And perhaps you've experienced relationships where you completely molded yourself to please, where you forgot your own limits to fit into the other person's world, where you lost yourself in the name of an us that never truly included you. Perhaps you gave so much of yourself that now you feel like there's nothing left, that you're empty, that you're lost. But this feeling of loss is actually a chance to find yourself again, because the void left when the other person leaves is the space your soul needed to reclaim. And this is the deepest healing, realizing that you are home, that you are love, that you are the source, that everything you projected onto another already existed within you, but was dormant. Attachment in this context is merely the symptom of a soul that has forgotten its wholeness, and the path back begins when you choose to look at this without guilt, without judging yourself for having lost yourself, without being ashamed of having become attached, because this too is part of the process. It, too, is a path. It, too, is sacred. Rumi also said, "When the soul is ready, what is yours will find it." But before that, you need to find yourself, reunite. Listen to yourself. Rebuild yourself from what is yours, not from what you expected from the other. This doesn't mean you won't love anymore. It means you will love with more freedom, with more awareness, with more spiritual maturity. It means that love will no longer be a place where you hide from your pain, but a space where you share your wholeness with the other. And that changes everything. Because when you see yourself whole, you no longer accept crumbs. You no longer accept halves. You no longer accept losing yourself to be accepted. You begin to move with emotional dignity. You begin to honor your own presence. You begin to build a true relationship with your soul. And this transforms the kind of love you attract, the kind of connection you sustain, the kind of life you live. If you felt that this text spoke to some part of you that was forgotten, if you felt that it brought you a mirror or a key, write here in the comments. I go back to being who I am without depending on anyone to remind me of it. Write with presence as an act of silent reconnection, like someone accepting their soul's call to live no longer according to a borrowed identity, but from the truth that has always been there, waiting for them. And now that you've started remembering, you need to hear what comes next. Because the soul, when it begins to awaken, no longer accepts sleep. It wants more. It wants wholeness. And that's what we're going to talk about now. Letting go isn't forgetting. It's honoring without carrying. And that changes everything. Because for so long you were taught that the true sign of overcoming was no longer remembering, no longer feeling, no longer crying, closing the door and never looking back. But that's not liberation. That's denial. And everything you deny eventually comes back. It comes back behind your back, in your dreams, in the silences, in the triggers, in the moments when you least expect it, and most need to be whole. Because the soul doesn't want you to forget. It wants you to understand. It wants you to transform. It wants you to integrate. Healing doesn't happen when you close the door, but when you understand why you were still peering through the keyhole. When you admit that, even though you've told everyone you've moved on, there was still a part of you there, trapped on the other side. A part that wanted to see if anyone was still there. A part that wasn't searching for the other, but searching for meaning. Searching for an explanation for the end. Searching for answers that never came. And that's not weakness. That's human. That's spiritual. That's the very point where sacred detachment begins. Letting go, at this level, isn't about aggressively cutting ties. It's not about blocking memories. It's not about deleting photos as if that erases feelings. Consciously letting go is about honoring what was. It's about recognizing that something existed, that something mattered, that it shaped you, taught you, revealed parts of yourself you might not have known otherwise. But it's also about accepting that the purpose of that story has ended, that the cycle has been fulfilled, that you no longer need to carry the symbols of the past to remember who you are now. And this isn't done in a rush. It's done with presence, with intention, with self-respect, Because attachment doesn't fade with time, it dissolves with awareness. It begins to fade when you stop trying to prove you're okay and start truly being okay. When you look within and realize you no longer need that bond to feel alive, that you can carry the memory lightly without letting it determine your choices in the present, that you can let the other person go, not because you've given up, but because you've found yourself again. Sacred detachment is a choice, a silent decision to stop living in what once was and open yourself to what can be. It's when you realize that what hurt you so much wasn't the person themselves, but the space they occupied within your emotional fabric. A space that is now empty, yes, but it no longer needs to be filled by someone outside. It can be reclaimed by you, by your essence, by your truth, by your soul finally returning to its place of origin. Rumi said, "Do not seek outside what can only be found within." And that is the heart of detachment. Because when you understand that the other was merely a mirror, a bridge, a reflection of something that already existed within you, everything changes. You stop trying to repeat the same story in new bodies. You stop seeking in others what you lost within yourself. You begin to love without expecting love to save you. Because now you know, true love is what you offer yourself when you stop living for a past that no longer exists, except in your mind. And here begins liberation. Not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind born of deep understanding. The kind that doesn't erase but transforms. The kind that doesn't pretend but embraces. The kind that doesn't close the door in anger, but in gratitude. Because you no longer need to watch that crack. You no longer need to spy on what's left. You no longer feel the need to check if the other person regretted it, if they thought of you, if they miss you. Because the focus is no longer there. It's here, on you, in the now, in the present, in the place where the soul blossoms when it stops carrying the weight of everything that was. And this process is silent. It doesn't need to be announced. It doesn't need to be understood by anyone but you. Because it's not a performative detachment, it's a true detachment. It happens in the details, in the way you think, feel, and choose, in the way you approach relationships, in the way you react when something tries to pull you back into old patterns. Sacred detachment is the art of remembering without clinging, of acknowledging without reliving, of giving thanks without canceling yourself out. And make no mistake, you will miss it. There will be days when the memory will come back with a vengeance. There will be moments when your heart will want to relapse to seek again that old comfort, that fantasy of belonging. But now you will know. You will recognize that this is just an emotional wave, that it doesn't need to be fed, that it no longer defines who you are, because you have seen what lies beyond. You have already crossed the veil. You have already understood that true home isn't someone. It is an internal state, a peace that doesn't depend on anyone's presence. You won't forget, and you don't need to, because true overcoming doesn't erase. It illuminates. It looks back with love and says, "It was important, but it's no longer necessary." It takes a deep breath and releases it, not out of anger, but out of freedom, because you've already learned what you needed to. You've already reaped what you had to reap. You've felt enough to know you don't need to feel anymore. And that's spiritual maturity. It's emotional alchemy. It's you finally stopping fighting what you feel and starting to walk with it until it transforms into something new. And it's at this point that you begin to realize you're lighter, that you're more present, that you're more connected to your own soul, because now there's space. Space for new perceptions, for new bonds, for new ways of being and loving, and most importantly, for loving yourself. Because true detachment always brings us back to center, to the place where we no longer need others to validate us, choose us, confirm us. We are already whole. We are already enough. And if you've come this far feeling that this process is happening within you, even if slowly, even if there are still doubts, even if there are still difficult days, write here in the comments, "I release what has already fulfilled its mission." Write as someone consciously closing a cycle, as someone grateful but no longer carrying it, as someone who understands that the past can be honored, but that the soul was born to move on. And what comes now is the deeper answer you've been waiting for. Because pain only persists until you stop running from it and accept moving through it with presence. Maybe you're experiencing this right now, thinking about someone who's gone, but inside, you're still constructing dialogues that never existed. reliving scenes that never happened, rephrasing words that were never said, mentally answering questions that were never asked, trying, in the silence of your mind, to find closure for something that ended without closure. And that's exactly where the unending pain resides. It's not the ending that hurts, it's what was left hanging in the air, the interrupted conversation, the look that never came, the hug that was denied, the absence of an "I understand" and "I'm sorry." It was real. The pain isn't the end. The pain is the part that wasn't heard. You may be sitting there right now, with everything seemingly under control, doing your chores, taking care of life, smiling at others, but inside a part of you still talks to him, or to her, and it's not just talking. It's justifying. It's trying to understand. It's searching for answers in memories that become labyrinths. And deep down, you know none of this will change what was. But even so, you carry on, because your soul still waits. Waits for an explanation that may never come. Waits for a cure that doesn't yet know how to bring about. Waits to be freed from what your mind insists on holding on to. This is an invisible but powerful pattern. The soul constructs these imaginary dialogues as a way to process pain. Because when reality doesn't offer closure, imagination tries to fill the void, and you create versions of what could have been. You create answers you'd like to hear. You create endings that bring relief, even if only for a few seconds. But deep down, you know, this is just a palliative, an emotional attempt to survive the unsaid. And this unsaid builds up. It turns into heaviness, into anxiety, into anguish, into veiled resentment, into clinging to the unresolved past. You try to move on. You tell yourself it's over, that it was better this way, that it was necessary. But every time you encounter something that reminds you, even from afar, it all comes back. The smell, the music, the place, the feeling. And once again, you're there, your body in the present, but your soul trapped in a time that no longer exists. And you're not alone. Thousands of people live this way, trapped in incomplete stories, trapped in versions of themselves that were never allowed to fully express themselves, trapped in questions that never found answers. And this is where the real application of this spiritual understanding comes in. It's no longer about trying to understand the other person, about trying to fit their behavior into your theories, about trying to justify what happened based on your expectations. Healing begins when you change the question. When you stop asking, "Why did they do that?" and start asking, "Why does this still hurt me?" When you stop looking outside and start looking inside. Because it's there inside that there are still fragments of you waiting to be heard, accepted, and present. Now imagine a part of you, a younger, perhaps wounded version, sitting in a corner of your heart. It no longer wants to know if he thought of you. It no longer wants to know if he'll ever come back. What this part of you wants is for you to come back, for you to sit beside it and say, "I see you. I know it hurt. I'm here now." Because true healing happens when you stop seeking comfort in external versions of the story and start offering shelter to your own soul. This is spiritual application in real life. This is transforming pain into awareness. This is stopping running from absence and starting to fill it with presence, with your own presence. Because there is no external dialogue that will replace the conversation you need to have with yourself. No response from another will heal you if you haven't already asked the right questions of your soul. No reunion will mend what was broken if the part of you that broke is still ignored. Maybe you're still stuck in the cycle of wondering what would have happened if he had stayed, if she had tried, if you had done things differently. But if is a slow poison. It paralyzes. It intoxicates. It creates the illusion that something could have changed when, in fact, everything happened exactly as it needed to happen to awaken you, to show you where there are still parts of you waiting for you. And that's powerful. It's painful, but it's liberating. You're no longer there, but parts of you may still be, still inhabiting that emotional home, still waiting for the other to return and validate what you felt. But now in this moment you have the chance to become the validator, to become the voice that welcomes, to become the presence that listens. And that's not just beautiful, it's essential, because until you do, you'll continue to live with that feeling of emptiness even when everything seems to be in place. Rumi said, "The wound is the place where the light enters." And perhaps you have that open wound right now, hurting, bleeding silently, But that's exactly where the light wants to enter. Not to erase what happened, but to illuminate what remains. To reveal the part of you that still believes you'll only be okay when the other person understands, when the other person returns, when the other person says what you needed to hear. But what if that sentence never comes? What if silence is the only answer? Will you keep waiting? Or will you choose now to listen to yourself? Yes, you can imagine this scene for the last time, but not as an escape, as a ritual, as closure, as a symbolic act of releasing the weight of the unsaid. Close your eyes for a moment. Visualize the scene, you standing before the person, but this time, expecting nothing. Just saying, I accept that you can't give me what I expected. I accept that this is no longer up to you. I accept that my healing is now my responsibility. And breathe. Let go. Because this scene, however imaginary, can be the beginning of your freedom. And if in this process you feel that something inside you has moved even slightly, even if still insecure, write here in the comments. I listened to what was silent. He writes as if he understands that pain is not a punishment, but a portal. That absence is not the end, but the beginning of a return to oneself. And what comes now is the moment when you learn to give voice to what has never been heard, because your soul doesn't want explanations. It wants to be acknowledged by you. Here, now. You're not the one left behind. You're the one who survived and chose to carry on. And that completely changes the way you look at pain. Because for so long, you believed your story was what happened to you, that your identity was shaped by the wounds, the rejections, the silences that cut you deep. You learned to define yourself by absences, by the no's you received, by the loves that weren't reciprocated, by the bonds that ended meaninglessly. But now, perhaps for the first time, you're beginning to understand that you're not what was missing. You're what remained standing, even after everything fell apart. Rumi said, "Don't walk away so quickly. You are still shaping yourself into something new. And this needs to be heard with the heart, because your process isn't over. You're not late, you're not broken, you're not failing because you still feel. You're in transition. You're being refined, you're being reborn. And this rebirth doesn't happen with fireworks. It happens in silence, in the simple act of choosing not to abandon yourself, of waking up every day and continuing, even without having all the answers, even carrying painful questions, even having to rebuild a new version of yourself without yet knowing where it will all lead. This is the moment when you begin to move beyond identifying with the wound and connect with the survivor, with the part of you that went through what seemed impossible, that felt pain and still decided to love again, that fell countless times but never stopped searching for a way back to yourself. This is no small thing. This is strength. This is spiritual courage. This is your soul's expression. I'm still here, and not just here, but ready to move on. But moving on isn't about being distracted. It's not about pretending. It's not about filling gaps with empty promises. Moving on is about acknowledging the weight of what you've experienced, being grateful for the lessons and letting go. It's about accepting that, even if you don't have all the answers, you can move forward with ease, with faith, with awareness, because the past no longer needs to dictate the pace of your present. It no longer needs to hold your hand. It can now simply stay where it belongs, as a part of the road, and no longer the place where your soul lives trapped. And when you begin to walk with this new awareness, something changes inside. You realize you no longer need to run. You no longer need to prove anything to anyone. You no longer need to repeat the same escape movements that once led you to the same place. You begin to move with more presence, with more calm, with more wisdom, because now it's your soul that's guiding you. No longer fear, no longer neediness, no longer attachment. And this shift doesn't happen suddenly. It happens in small gestures, in the choice to take a deep breath when a memory comes back, in the decision to stop sending that message that only holds you back, in the silent determination to stop stalking that profile, in the self-embrace you give yourself when you feel like returning to a place you know you no longer belong. This is emotional maturity. This is spirituality applied to real life. This is the soul taking the helm of its own journey. Perhaps you still feel the emptiness of the one who left, but now that emptiness begins to stop being pain and become space. Space to be filled with you, to reconnect with parts of yourself that were forgotten, to rediscover what enchants you, what moves you, what inspires you. Because when you let go of what once was, You create space for what can be, and this can be is where the soul begins to blossom, where the wound becomes a portal, where absence becomes freedom, where silence becomes home. It's at this point that you realize you're different, that you no longer suffer for the same reasons, that you no longer seek the same validation, that you no longer need to prove to others that you were valuable. You know, you feel, you honor, and that's enough. You begin to recognize your own light, even when the world doesn't applaud. You begin to build a life that makes sense to you, not one designed to fit the eyes of those who didn't stay. And all of this happens because, at some point, you chose to keep going. You chose to get up even with shaking knees. You chose to rebuild yourself even without knowing where to begin. You chose to stop begging for presents and start offering yourself the attention you so desperately craved from others. This is invisible strength. This is a silent miracle. This is true transformation. And yes, there will still be difficult days. Days when you'll want to go back. You'll want to reopen wounds. You'll miss someone. But now, unlike before, you'll know you can feel and still move on. That you can cry and still not get lost. That you can remember and still not drag yourself back. Because the difference now lies in where you live. No longer in need but in awareness. No longer in trauma but in presence. No longer in the need to be chosen, but in the power to choose. The soul that moves on is one that recognizes that some stories weren't meant to last, but to awaken. That some people came to show where it still hurts, not to heal. That certain endings aren't failures but liberations. And that sometimes, the greatest proof of love is letting go. Letting go of the other. Letting go of the idea. Letting go of the hope that no longer makes sense. And in doing so, you find yourself. You align. You truly begin to return home. And if today you feel like you're going through this process of letting go, of moving on, of rebuilding yourself, even with fear, even without guarantees, write here in the comments, I still don't have all the answers. Write with truth, as someone who honors themselves, as someone who knows that moving on isn't forgetting. It's reminding yourself every day of who you're becoming, and what comes next will show you how to transform that presence into strength. Because now it's your soul that's walking and it knows exactly where it needs to go. If you've made it this far, take a deep breath, because that already says a lot about your soul. You chose to feel. You chose to listen. You chose to follow. And that's a giant step. Not for me, for you, for the part of you that waited so long to be heard, and now finally is. And if this journey resonated with you, if you want to continue diving into this space of silent healing, subscribe to the channel now. Each video here is a fragment of the soul being remembered, collected, reconnected. Rumi hasn't stopped, and neither will you. Leave a like if you felt this resonated with you. It helps spread this message to other souls also trying to heal in silence. And it doesn't stop there. The next video is already showing up on the screen. Click and continue, because this inner journey is just beginning.